I'm Carol Chalk, and I want to welcome you to the presentation of the Task Force on Gas Drilling of the Tompkins County Council of Governments, presentation on taxation issues related to gas drilling in New York State. If you want more information about this or any of the things that we talk about today, and we'll give you the email, the URL at the end as well. That URL is at the bottom of that page. It's tinyurl.com/gas assessment will get you to our white paper on taxation and other information. You can also get there by going to the Tompkins County Legislature site, looking for the Council of Governments, and linking through. I am Carol Chalk. I am on the Tompkins County Legislature, where I chair our Facilities and Infrastructure Committee. We oversee roads, bridges, facilities, airport, solid waste, and I am former chair of the county's Planning, Development, and Environmental Quality Committee, where I looked at water and tourism issues as well as we were starting this research that I'm going to present. I was also one of our liaisons to the Tompkins County Council of Governments, and as you know, they formed a gas drilling task force where I chair the Assessment and Land Valuation Subcommittee work group. We use that interchangeably on that group. For 25 years before that, I had experience in public and private sector looking at project and budget development. How do you look at costs that you expect, and how do you look at the revenues you're expecting to come in, and do they match or not? Don Barber, who we're going to sort of go back and forth between the two of us, is an elected official in the town of Caroline. He has many more years on me in the public sector, supervisor since 1997, a board member for 18 years, and for the Council of Governments, he is the former chair and co-chair. He also is very active in the New York State Association of Towns, where he is on their executive committee. In our audience here in the front, Jay Franklin is the director of the Tompkins County Assessment Department, and Al Fiorella, I'm going to botch your title, is one of our top assessors in that department, and they will be available to answer questions and pipe up as well. And I want to also credit the work that I'm presenting. We had just this incredible committee of assessors, public assessors, private appraisers, bankers, lenders, former and current lenders, people in the lending world, municipal officials, landowners, realtors, real estate attorneys, and concerned citizens who have worked on all of the issues that we've taken up. And all I do is come up here and shoot my mouth off, but they're responsible for a lot of the work. Over a year ago, I agreed to chair this work group, which evolved into a subcommittee, to work with the county assessment department. Tompkins County has a full county assessment approach. Most of the state conducts assessment in each separate town, and ours is a centrally run professional office that is recognized around the state as setting a very high standard for keeping assessment extremely equitable. We look every year at properties across the board and on a rotating basis at individual properties to make sure that as you get your assessed value for your property, that we are doing it in a fair and equitable manner that is adjusted according to market forces. And I thought it was important for us in particular to look at the potential effect of gas drilling when and if New York State approves this new type of drilling. Were we prepared to track and tax how property values might change, and how is gas production taxed, that we get a handle on that. This is important for individuals. If your property value goes down because there's drilling on your neighbor's land, are we prepared to know quickly and reflect that in your assessment? Similarly, if land speculators come in and drive prices way up, property values up, and that's before you get any royalty checks, but for the property value itself, which may operate in different ways that we'll talk about, will we know to assign those properties a higher assessment? For municipalities and municipal officials in the audience, as we budget, what do we need to know about expenditures and expected revenues? I mean, that's what we do. That's the most important part of what we do. As a committee, we weren't surprised to find out that we didn't have the full information. I knew going in that we need a new field in the county database even to track where there are leases. That information is kept in the county clerk's office, and all the fields are used up. And frankly, I expected this to be a pretty easy committee. I would come in, I would find out that we need a new database, I don't know, $40,000, $60,000, and we would come to the legislature, and I would have done my job. We were surprised to find out that that wasn't the only thing we didn't have. We were surprised to find out the extent. We found that our public assessors are not able to find the full information that they need to make sure they both have the production value and the assessment value for properties and where there are leases. We found that the problems that our public assessors were having are also prevalent in the private market. And we found that New York State was using a system designed in 1978 for tax production. So we decided to engage in a process that was more extensive than what we had originally envisioned. We went back to the basics, examined the existing laws and the process. And the operative part of the environmental conservation law, which you can read up there, it's Article 23, Section 0303, makes very clear that the provision of other parts of environmental conservation law about what happens or doesn't happen with gas drilling, both current and future potential gas drilling. The provision of this article shall supersede all local laws or ordinances relating to the regulation of the oil, gas, and solution mining industries, but shall not supersede local government jurisdiction over local roads or the rights of local governments under the real property tax law. So some of you know that Tompkins County has engaged in a long process since then to write a road use preservation law, and then we were looking at so how does this work in terms of our taxes that we will still be responsible for. So this committee of distinguished people started out thinking we had a simple question, and we ended up concentrating, at least so far, in 4 major areas, as we divided into 5 here, most of which I'm not going to talk about today, and we've talked about other places. I will just mention them. The gas leases affect the ability to mortgage property, and there are forces that play out for individuals, for the lending institutions, and maybe for the secondary market, mortgage market that we hadn't quite understood. That lease information is unavailable. New York State doesn't require the same thing that some other states require. When leases are signed, that you go right to the clerk's office and make sure that information is thorough and complete in a timely fashion. And so we've been looking at that and what could be done about that. We looked at the ways that a cumulative impact. There are wells now in New York State. There are vertical wells. Why haven't these issues come up in the past? And we found that a lot of the question is that ramping up in the way that this activity is proposed is going to affect, in a way that it didn't before, individuals, banks, markets, and governments. And then the part that we're going to concentrate on today has to do with the ways in which we measure and tax gas production and the time lag involved between the expenditure, our need to expend funds, and any cost recovery to any of us. We went and looked back at what does this activity look like, and this sort of on a community scale from above is the part of Wyoming, and I will point out this pointer here that these big pads that you see, those are pads, not houses. The lines that you see at a distance are not roads, those are pipelines. And I believe it's up in through here. If you can see some of those smaller lines from where you're sitting, those are roads. And you can see some little dots that are houses. So on a larger scale, that's what this activity can potentially look like brought to its extended conclusion. This was a picture that I took in Bradford County. What does it look like on a more sort of house-by-house basis? And what are the ways in which your assessment can be affected, not just in terms of the metering and and counting of the gas that's coming on those properties and those pads that may be up above or close to your house, but what happens to your property value on your land, your house, your improvements, if this is what you've got in your backyard. And then roads. I wanted to just show you just a little bit about the reasons that, and you've all seen pictures probably, of the ways in which our roads that are designed to carry cars on a certain frequency might have to carry big trucks that they're not built for. So we established that there are problems with the current system. This is a summary. There'll be costs, local costs during drilling. The systems are insufficient. There's a time lag, and we'll also talk about the fact that gas revenues are not predictable. And Don and I will take different sections of these. So I'm going to talk a little bit about costs. Again, this is a summary slide, and I'll go into a little more depth. Costs are significant. We know that. I can't tell you exactly what they will be. The total is unknowable in advance. Costs will be incurred during the drilling period, during construction of pads and road construction to service those pads. The costs are incurred. We have to budget for anticipated costs, usually the year before you know that costs are being incurred. That creates its own problems. They'll be spread throughout many parts of the municipal budgets, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about, and then we'll go into the time lag. The assumption that we could predict all of these costs to the dollar has proved to be elusive. Some of the examples that we have looked at or anticipate, I will talk about in a little more depth. And I will credit first the Tompkins County Council of Governments Gas Drilling Task Force formed a series of committees to try to produce a sophisticated, informed analysis of the impacts we can expect from this activity. Work groups, not ours, mapped existing and anticipated leases, looked at road use, worked on planning issues in general, and then in depth with some of our towns, and commissioned a community impact analysis. And that report is on the TCOG website, and you can go to that for some more of this information as well. For the county, well, I did a presentation on this topic in December, and I asked at that point, sort of at the end of the year, what costs had we already incurred, before there's even any prospect of permits being issued. And here are some of the numbers that I heard. In 2011, our health department, and I noticed that the director of our health department, Frank Krupa, is here, says, thank you for coming. And I heard that you heard about this presentation when you were in Albany, talking about what kinds of revenue you might expect and help from New York State might come, and we're told go back to your local assessment department and to your legislature and talk to them. So thanks for coming. I did learn that our health department spent $20,000 last year for a health planner starting to look at some of the impacts that they might need to deal with. Under permitting, they're anticipating needing 1 FTE of a public health sanitarian's time at a cost of $75,000. Our planning department had raised money. We raised money for one additional staff person, 1 year, one-time grant at $50,000 plus fringe. We put in time of the director, the deputy director who worked with the Water Resources Council, and a tourism planner. And under permitting, that won't necessarily increase. It could decrease because we're in better shape planning-wise than our towns. We don't have the land use jurisdiction that you do, that you may not be prepared for. How many of our towns have paid planning staff? I believe it's maybe two, maybe three. Highways, and I'll talk a little more about this in a minute, but so far in 2011, we didn't add up the hours, but the time of our highway director, an engineer, the county attorney, and the county administrator to write our road use law was significant. And then we've just selected a consultant to help us determine the process to implement our road use law that will, again, be fair among all comers. And that will cost us $30,000 approximately to set up the process, which, by the way, will then be made available to our towns to use or not as you see fit as you gear up for those of you who are implementing your own road use laws. Our assessment department, they're here. They set us up. They were here a few hours ago setting this up and working with us through this entire process we've been through at every meeting, and haven't charged us for that time other than, haven't counted it separately. Under permitting, they anticipate needing at least 2 more appraisers and a half-time tax mapping person to handle the gas lease information, approximately $160,000 a year. Our clerk's office, public safety, social services did not give us specific estimates. So, under drilling itself, areas that we anticipate significant impacts include the kinds of things that you see up on this list. Roads is a big one. It costs us now as a county $80,000 to $100,000 per mile to just pave completed roads, to repave. When you get into needing to put in a new road or to rebuild a road whose subsurface layers have been destroyed, you're talking in excess of $1 million per mile. And some of you from the towns can talk about and think about what your costs are, but that's per mile, and we're talking about an activity that, as we saw in that picture, distributes throughout back roads. Bridges are not on this list, but probably should have been. Our terrain, in particular, our streams and hills, raise the cost over what you would see in a flatter area, probably, for all of those kinds of costs. Drafting of new laws. I probably should have added the slide that the planning group developed of local government tools, the 18 local government tools that would ideally be put in place by towns, not county, to have the kinds of planning tools in place so that you can eventually weigh in and impact where and how this activity might happen. It starts with a comprehensive plan that not all of our towns have, zoning regulations, site plans, special permit, critical environmental area designations, aquifer protection, wetlands. I'm not going to read the whole list. Mobile home park regulations could be affected, floodplain, stormwater control, and things like that, and what kind of fees. So do you have the planning staff and then the implementation staff to put that in place? You don't need me to point, do you? So drafting and oversight of new laws is the second bullet point. Monitoring of air and water quality is something that it isn't clear where that will happen or is expected to happen. Our health department will be responsible for some of it, but towns may want to implement some of their own. Public safety and emergency response are some of the big ones. We anticipate and have researched what's happened other places where this activity has ramped up, in fact, and they receive increased calls, industrial and vehicular accidents that they need to deal with, training in dealing with industrial accidents, hazardous material spills. With the exception, I think, of the city of Ithaca. How many of you out there, do you know, Don, how your local fire departments are staffed by volunteers? And
yeah, pretty much all of them are.
Pretty much volunteers. So, and I think that a lot of our towns...
Emergency response EMS teams are, even in the rural towns, are often paid.
Okay. So some of you are paid and some of you are volunteer, but I know that there's existing shortages and possibility of transition to paid staff or a greater number of paid staff. Law enforcement, enforcing local road use laws and agreements is a big one. Monitoring use of designated routes, weight requirements. We don't have scales distributed throughout the county to measure the weight of trucks and know whether they're following the road use law that we know we have clear jurisdiction to be implementing. Increased demand due to non-local workers, of just general law enforcement, increased incidents of intoxication and violence. So we did obtain statistics from Bradford County, Pennsylvania, from some towns in North Dakota and Wyoming that have documented increases in arrests, DWIs, traffic violations, and things that we hadn't thought about: protection from abuse orders, assaults, and warrants for non-appearance in court by workers who are in this area for a while and then move on. So in Bradford County, in a 2-year period, in 2009, DWIs were at 129. By 2011, they were at 351. DUIs, small town, Towanda, population 3,000. DUIs were at 21. 2 years later, at 60. Public health, I mentioned, air quality, water. It's best to have that baseline study. But then there were things we hadn't thought about. The health status of workers. Were people coming to the county current on vaccinations, needing to check that? Health assistance for uninsured workers falls to the jurisdiction of the county. And so that led to the staffing figures that they gave us. Social services. Increased housing demand in our already high-rent market. We're finding in other counties and places where there is drilling already, particularly where rents were high already, can lead to increased homelessness and other strains on families and local social services. I'm almost done with this list. The Soil and Water Conservation District oversight and liaison work between contractors and property owners. I don't know if I'm going in quite the order that's on that list up there. The implementation of local soil erosion laws. And then the TCOG task force is just beginning to look at pipeline regulation, pipeline implications, and the costs to communities. So we're just beginning to look at that. Anybody who wants to get involved, see Liz Thomas, who chairs that board, is out in the audience. So, faced with knowing that we weren't quite sure where we stood in being ready for this and what the laws and processes allowed us to do, we decided rather than wade into them, we would first figure out, well, what are the principles we'd like to see as we look into this? And the kinds of things that the committee talked about were that taxpayers shouldn't be responsible for these increased costs. If there's an industry that is going to net profits from this, there ought to be ways, and other states have built-in ways to make sure that some of those costs are covered, and New York State certainly should be counted among them. That we should be covering local as well as state costs. That the cost recovery, we wanted to make sure that we were going to at least investigate the use of all of the tools that we saw out there. And the ones that we found were the use of a severance tax, which distributes the revenues that come in across municipalities that may not and certainly don't under the current system net any revenue from New York State's current system, which only collects any revenue other than minor permit fees in those towns in which there is not only active production, active wells, but there's a net production from those wells. If it dry wells, you see the negative effects we're talking about, but don't necessarily see the income. Permit fees, that those ought to be looked at, and again at local and state levels, and that the ad valorem property tax, ad valorem, added value, is what we tax now from the actual, the units of gas that come out of the well is what New York State taxes now. Each of those kinds of methods of cost recovery cover different kinds of costs. Other states use a combination or all three, and we didn't think that permits should be issued until this was all looked at in a public way. We found, I will say, in the other states, we found a variety of taxes and fees, and the severance taxes in particular, which are collected usually on a state level and then distributed by different states with systems that go everywhere from just putting the income into the state coffers operating budget to dedicating those funds to very specific regions where the impact is felt, not only to the immediate locality, to purposes. In Colorado, they dedicate a bunch of the money to tourism campaign. We think of Colorado as the place to go to ski and go fish and hike in the mountains, not as a place where there are a lot of gas wells, when in fact there are, because they spend money as a state on that from their severance tax. So we found that other states vary their severance tax from the lows down around 3% and 4%. Some are lower, to a whole group that sit around 7 or 8%, to another group at 12 to 13%. Alaska is an outlier at 25%, although we will note that they don't have other property taxes there, so that we didn't use that one. Very few of these are simple tax systems. They use some combination of a minimum amount, usually the first X amount of gas that comes out of the ground that is severed from the ground either is or isn't taxed, and then the amounts go up or down per unit from there as your production numbers go up. We did also find and conclude that the New York State local ad valorem system, which allows collection of revenues in those towns that are most seriously impacted, where there is production, is actually quite elegant in the way it allows local assessors to perform a simple calculation and get it right. So we didn't end up thinking that that ought to be thrown out or significantly changed as a system, as a whole system. On the contrary, we became concerned that New York State will look to replace that system with something that brings dollars to state coffers at the expense of the local level. And that's something we got quite concerned about. We really don't want to see. We want to see a severance tax, but we don't want to see New York State bring money to state levels and do away with the local level tax. And both, as soon as New York State Association of Counties heard about that as a possibility, they literally the next day passed a resolution calling on New York State to make sure that didn't happen. So our tax paper findings, I will summarize here, is we should be establishing a severance tax, we should be verifying the measurement of gas, we should be updating what Don will explain as the unit of production value formula, and we should address the delay. I will say a word more here about the measurement of gas. New, accurate, and verifiable methods of measuring shale gas are required, and that's an essential condition of fair taxation. Currently, gas companies install the meters, read the meters, and self-report how much gas they get out of your well to the DEC, who reports it back to the local tax assessor. The brand of meter, we believe, is approved by I think it's the PSC, Public Service Commission, but nobody else comes back to the property, makes sure there's a meter installed, makes sure it's being read, makes sure it's correct. When you go to the grocery store and buy a pound of meat, we have somebody from our Department of Weights and Measures in the county who has checked that scale to make sure that your pound is a pound. Or you go to the gas pump to fill your car, and that meter goes ka-ching, 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 and you're filling your gas tank. We have somebody, that same person, Don Ellis, has gone there and made sure that the meters are accurate. But New York State doesn't have anybody even slated to come and do that. That needs to be fixed. By the way, the numbers that come out and are self-reported are the same figures that the company uses to pay royalties to the landowner, how much gas has come out of your property, that the public sector uses to calculate the tax, and that the state would then use for a severance tax. So, you know, if we can't measure how much gas has actually come out of the ground and verify that, we can't assure the landowner or the public that we are exercising due oversight. We will go into the UPV formula and the delay in greater detail. But those were the four major findings of our paper, and you can find those both in the summary that is being handed out, if there are any copies left on the desk, in the press release, and then in the paper itself on our website. What's an ORPTS? It sounds like something from a Dr. Seuss book. And so with those principles in mind, we set out to understand the current system and found that it wasn't easy. And with the exception of Don, who's absolutely brilliant and understood all of this before any of the rest of us came in, and Jay and his staff who understood it, the rest of us on the committee really needed an education about what all these terms were. There's a very detailed manual and explanation. We seem to be the first to actually go and try to simplify the manual and cut to what is that basic formula and convey it in a picture that is easier to understand. But we did so partly by spending a lot of time learning terminology. And so I'm just going to go through a few of them here. The Office of Real Property Tax Services, ORPTS, which until a few months ago was actually ORPS, Office of Real Property Services. There are now tax services. I'm not sure what they've eliminated in those services, but they're still taxing. Administers the methodology at the state level, while the local assessment departments use the information that they provide and the methodology they provide to administer at the local level. That is all part of New York State's Department of Taxation and Finance, and that's all been reorganized, and staff has been seriously cut. So that's the important thing to know there, is that they're not looking to take on work. Their staff was cut. The ORPTS office in particular was cut from 220 to 150 in about 6 months ago, and I don't think they're allowed to replace retirees. So they, in order to do anything further on this, they're going to need some assistance. UPV stands for Unit of Production Value. Ad valorem means according to value, and that is what we build into the property tax that is assessed by our assessment department and billed along with property tax. But when you have a change in value on your particular property, according to the market value, that gets worked into the value of your property. The production tax gets billed separately to the gas company, and one of the issues is, do we know where to send the bill? We discovered quickly that there are no stupid questions. It's not intuitive. Don will explain it, let us both get through our explanations, and we each had to do several iterations through the formula and various ways of looking at it before it became clear. So we'll open it up to questions at the end.